Good evening. It is 5:31 PM on Tuesday, April 15th, 2025, and this regular meeting of the Sandpoint Planning and Zoning Commission is now called to order in council chambers at City Hall, 1123 West Lake Street, Sandpoint, Idaho. For the record, I am Commission Chairman Mose Dunkel presiding. Also present are Vice Chair Wayne Benner and Commissioners Scott Torpy, Reed Weber, and Will Mitchell. We do have a quorum. If everyone will please stand, we will recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic to which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Do commissioner members have any announcements or reports? Hearing none, we'll proceed. We'll now move on to the consent calendar. And at this time, I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes from our March 18th, 2025 meeting.
So moved.
Second. Commissioner Benner moved and Commissioner Weber seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes and the minutes are approved as presented. Next, matters from the public and general announcements. We will proceed with matters from the public. If you would like to speak on a topic pertinent to city business that is not on the agenda, now is your opportunity to do so. If you wish to speak and haven't yet completed a sign-up form, please do so and hand it to the staff. The forms are located on the table by the doors. If you're attending remotely and wish to speak on a matter that is not on the agenda, please raise your hand on Zoom at this time. Please note that the city does have a policy on public meeting decorum. The rules are posted just outside the chamber's entrance doors. In summary, I would ask that everyone please be pleasant and respectful. Not make derogatory statements about others, including city staff, not to be disorderly or disruptive. No calling out, clapping, or holding up signs, etc. The commission cannot take testimony on any specific planning or land use related matter outside of an official public hearing. For the public hearing on tonight's agenda, please hold that testimony until after the hearing is open. Comment and testimony opportunities during the meeting are for comments only, no questions or debate. You may contact the mayor or staff during regular business hours if you have any questions or concerns. When it is your turn to speak, please state your name and whether you reside inside the city limits of Sandpoint. Each speaker will have up to 3 minutes. Madam Clerk, has anyone signed up to speak during the general public comment time? Or any hands on Zoom?
No, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Well, that will conclude our public comment portion of this meeting. Let's see. We're moving on to the public hearing. We have a public hearing that is a public hearing and decision on the request of a conditional use permit for a 156 unit multifamily development on Samuelson Avenue. Just a note, in the agenda, it is wrote up incorrectly. There's a typo that says 135 units. That should be corrected to 156. And to be clear, it was correctly notified in news of record in the Sandpoint Daily Bee. So.
All of the posting was correct and compliant with law. There's just a typo on the agenda.
Okay, and we fixed it, so we're good here. All right, thank you. I will now recite the order and procedure for the public meeting. First, staff explanation of the subject of the public hearing, presentation by applicant and or their representative. Any questions should be directed to the applicant at that time. Third, opening of public hearing, at which time the public may provide testimony. Those who wish to testify are required to complete a sign-up sheet. If commissioners wish to ask questions of the person testifying, those questions need to be posed before the person returns to their seat. The order for those who wish to speak will be as follows. First, in favor, next, neutral, and finally, opposed. Then there'll be an opportunity for rebuttal testimony from the applicant or their representative. Final questions may be asked of the applicant at that time. However, if new facts are elicited, the public will be given an opportunity to comment on any new facts. And then we will move on to the public hearing, which will then be closed for deliberation. No new information may be provided after the hearing is closed. Questions may be directed only to city staff during deliberations. We will begin with staff presentation, followed by the applicant's presentation. Then we'll open the hearing for public testimony, followed by rebuttal testimony from the applicant. After the hearing has been closed, we will deliberate. And before I proceed, I will ask for confirmation from each commissioner that there is no conflict of interest or ex parte contact regarding this matter.
No. Commissioner Dunkel, I've worked with the representative in a professional capacity, but I have no financial gain from this project.
Thank you.
None on my behalf.
None.
Okay, and I have none myself, so we're good to move forward. I will now yield the floor to consulting planner Darren Fluke.
He's on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. It's nice to see you again. For the record, my name is Darren Fluke. I'm the city's consultant for planning and zoning matters, and I'll be taking you through the public hearing request for this conditional use application. I think. If I can get the screen. Tonight, you'll be hearing PCUP 23-0004, which is a request for a conditional use permit for a 156 unit apartment complex. The property is located here in the extreme northwest corner of the city's city limits of Sandpoint at the existing terminus of Samuelson Road. You'll see the property here is just north of Woodland. And again, right at the very end of where Samuelson terminates at the current time. As far as the zoning on the property goes, it is zoned RM, residential multifamily, which is the zone intended to accommodate this sort of land use. You can see the arrangement of zoning designations here in the immediate neighborhood, with rural residential being here to the east of the property, and this accommodates the county fairgrounds over here. And you'll see a range of other zoning designations, including the mixed use residential and also some single family residential in the area. Just by way of orientation, of course, the Sandpoint Airport sits here south and generally east of the property in question. So tonight, the request is for a 156 unit multifamily project, as noted by the chairman. That of those 156 units, they are distributed between 4 buildings on site. We'll go through the site plan in just a second. The applicant's indicating that 100 of those units will be 1 bedroom, 1 bath units, and 56 of the units will be 2 bedroom, 2 bath. The project also includes a 5,300 square foot clubhouse and pool area, as well as 196 car parking spaces, which is more than is required by the code, and 237 bike parking spaces, which is 25% less than required by the code. We'll talk a bit more about that later in the presentation as well. And then finally, the project includes an extension of Samuelson Road of approximately 816 feet to the north of its existing terminus. This is the site plan. I can switch screens and work with a site plan where we can zoom in and out and talk about particular features of the site. But just to get everybody oriented, Samuelson Road is here on the east of the project. This is the 800 feet that will be extended. The project proposes 2 approaches off the future public right-of-way, Samuelson, one here in the center and one here at the north. The 4 buildings are arranged around the perimeter of the property, as you see, with a central motor court or parking area well buffered, I guess you'd say, by the buildings from the public right of way. The clubhouse and pool area is centrally located here, as well as a maintenance building here. And then there's a couple of mail kiosks that are situated within the median areas of the project, and the parking again arranged within the center. What you see here on the margins of the property are the trash enclosures in orange. Again, well distributed throughout the site, so for easy access to all the buildings and the trash collection services. And Mr. Chairman, I should have noted for the commission that if you have questions while I'm going through this, please feel free to interrupt me and we'll deal with them as they come. As you all know, that all of this information is included in the staff report, which I'm sure you've all looked at, and so I'm going through this fairly quickly just to highlight what you've already seen. The building elevations look like this. This is on the top is what the applicant refers to as the outside of the building. This is the elevation that will be facing the street, Samuelson Avenue. The interior facing the motor court looks like this. On the bottom, you can see that there are garage units located here on either end of the building, as well as on the terminal ends of the building there. Tonight, the applicant has requested 2 waivers from the provisions of the zoning ordinance. The first is to reduce the required bike parking by 25%. Your code requires 2 spaces per unit, which would equal 312 bike parking spaces required. The applicant has made a fairly persuasive case in their written submittal that that's excessive for a project of this size. And they've proposed to reduce that parking requirement to 237 spaces, a 25% reduction, or 1.5 spaces per unit. One of the concessions that the applicant offered in this regard is 80 bike parking spaces that will be enclosed and secure within each building. And I'll just point those out to you really quickly. I should have done this. But at the garage end of each building, noted in green on the site plan here, and here, and here, and here, each of those units would accommodate 20 cycles in a rack system of storage. And again, those would be 80 total bike parking spaces, which will be secure and covered from the elements. The remainder of the spaces, of course, will be distributed throughout the site, as you can see on the site plan. The second waiver request is to reduce the required landscape buffer between buildings and the parking area from 15 feet to 10 feet. The detail that you see below here in this figure is the green area would be the required landscape area that is separated from the parking area. The code requires 15 feet, and what you'll see in this dimension is that the applicant is proposing a 10-foot landscape area with a 5-foot sidewalk, which provides access to all of the dwelling units within the project. And then the parking is dimensioned along with the travel aisles here in the parking area. I'm going to go through in detail for you what the code would require for you to approve these waiver requests, what the code requires for you to find that is. And so when you read these required findings, they'll read much like a variance, although the waiver provisions within the code are less stringent, I would say, than what the variance requirements are. But essentially, the spirit is the same, and that is that granting a waiver is essentially justified by the application that the applicant's proposing, and that it will not negatively impact surrounding land uses around the project. And this is, these are findings that the commission is obligated to find to grant the variance. I'll let the applicant speak to that in more detail, and I'm sure you've seen their written justification that was submitted with the application. And of course, I'll be happy to take questions on this as we go on if you like. The second thing is the required findings for a conditional use permit. There are 9 included within the Sandpoint City Code. I'm not going to read these. I know the commission is familiar with them, but just by way of a high-level review for the commission and citizenry who might be in attendance this evening, the idea of a conditional use is that these are generally land uses that would be compatible with what's zoned for in the proximity of the site, but they may have certain characteristics that are objectionable or might be harmful to surrounding land uses, and therefore the city places conditions of approval on the operation of the requested land use. In this case, you're looking at a multifamily development that is on property, again, 6 acres in size or so, 6.5 acres, that is zoned for multifamily residential. There's multifamily residential directly to the south, and this is generally in keeping with what the city's comprehensive plan and zoning ordinance has intended for this location of the city. What you see here are the code requirements for putting conditions of approval on an application. Again, the first one there is to minimize adverse impacts on surrounding land uses and to control the sequence and timing of development. These are fairly standard type considerations for a land use of this sort. And as you know, there are conditions of approval included within your staff report that the staff has recommended in conjunction with the application. So with that, that is my very rapid staff report, and I'd be happy to take any questions that the commission might have.
Commissioners, any question for?
Just a quick one. Early on in the presentation, it stated that there were 40% more parking spaces than required.
Correct.
Is it 40% or 40 more spaces themselves that are more than required?
Let me go back and take a quick look. I may have.
Because I think they're required to have 156 parking spaces, and that would mean 40 more than required, not 40% more than required. I don't know if that matters a lot, but just for the record.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioner, you're correct. I think I transposed a number here, and so you're correct.
Any more questions for staff? Okay, we'll now call to the podium the applicant or the representative for any presentation or remarks they would like to provide. For the record, please state your name and who you are representing as pertains to this application. Welcome.
Thank you. Norris D. Boyd, Boyd Wilson Company. We have some eyewash here for you. I'm not going to read the slides for you. I've been in this country since the 70s. I got here in the Air Force and worked at the survival school over in Ponderay County. I was here for a while, went back to Pennsylvania, and I've been back here for about 30 years. I would say at this point that Sandpoint and Northern Idaho are very close to my heart. And I know that I've skied Schweitzer and boated well before some of you were born. So very familiar with the country and very much interested in investing with a really nice project. Boyd Wilson itself, the corporate entity, was formed in 1985. We've been doing multifamily development since then. We are long-term holders. We have never sold anything. So we intend to be members of the community for a good long while. Hess Home Builders, who is a partner in this project, is an 11-generation builder in Lancaster County. They started building houses in the 1700s. They will not be building this project, but the current head of Hess Home Builders is an elk hunter. So I have been polluting his mind and telling him about and showing him the pleasures of North Idaho. So we may get him for a little while. Next one. and this is you. Thank you. Any questions about that?
Okay. Nicole Costello with Clearwater Engineering. I think a key component of this development is that the developer is also the owner and operator. They stay with the project afterwards. They don't sell it off. And so they take pride in their development, and that is, it's reflected in the layout and the design process. Darren already said a lot of what I'm about to say. He does a great job with the staff reports, but I do just want to highlight a few things. Again, the project is located in the far northwest corner of the city limits, shown there with the red line. And this project perfectly aligns with the comp plan for high-density multifamily residential. In conjunction with this project, Samuelson Avenue will be extended to along the property frontage to the north city boundary there, shown with the yellow line. Again, the site plan, we have 2 approaches proposed off of Samuelson Avenue. And I believe there was an agency comment regarding an approved fire turnaround on the north end there. And our intention is that that northern entrance would also serve as sort of a hammerhead turnaround. We've had some preliminary discussions about that with the city engineer. I do think that that is met, but that's the intention, and we can make that happen as needed. But that northern entrance is essentially multi-purpose that way. So again, the site has 4 standalone apartment complexes or 4 standalone buildings, and then a centralized clubhouse. Again, this is what those structures will look like. Pretty sharp.
Let me interject here. The buildings themselves are very interesting. You know, everybody talks about affordable housing, and you try very hard when you're doing something like this to get the cost down so that the apartments are in fact affordable. On this particular building, we're spending a good bit of money on the outside because I want it to look nice. But the building itself is 3 stories, but it only has 1 hallway in it. Typically in an apartment building, you have about 20% common area, which is unrentable. In this particular building, we've taken the common area down to 8%. We have some 2-story apartments, and we have some short hallways on the end. But that makes an exceedingly efficient building. So it helps as far as the rents are concerned.
Thank you. Again, 2 waivers requested for this project. We feel that they are meaningful and justified. As far as the bike parking goes, 2 spaces required per unit for 156 units. That equates to 312 spaces, which is a lot. We're requesting that 25% reduction, so the 237 total spaces, with 80 of those being secure indoor parking. With 100 of the 156 units being, or I guess our justification for that is that 100 of the 156 units are single bedroom. And I know from experience, or that Norris has said from experience, that oftentimes people just carry their bikes up to their units anyways. So then we would be left with 312 bike parking, metal facilities, spaces covering the land, covering the grounds and filling up the landscape area, and ultimately just becoming a maintenance issue. So with that, we are proposing, in yellow here would be the 157 exterior bike parking spaces. And in blue here, that shows where the 80 interior secure bike parking spaces would be. So 20 in each building.
Yeah, this is a little bit different than what we have done in the past. We're figuring people with $5,000 or $7,000 mountain bikes might appreciate, rather than carrying it up to their apartment, which we don't like, rather than carrying it up to their apartment, that a room where they could put it on a vertical stack and lock it up and keep it protected from the weather would be a real plus for them.
So for 156 units, a total of 237 bike parking spaces, which, as Darren said, comes out to about a little over 1.5 bike parking spaces per unit. The second waiver request here is for the landscape buffer. Code states that the primary buildings shall be separated by at least 15 feet from the parking. And while we are still proposing a 15-foot setback, it is 10 feet landscape, 5 feet sidewalk, so 33% landscape reduction. The property is burdened by a 20-foot drainage easement to the west, as you can see by that blue dashed line. So the property's already narrowed up by about 20 feet. And if we bring in from both sides another 5 feet to accommodate that landscape buffer, we're essentially eliminating these medians. And these medians serve as safety measures, both for vehicles and pedestrians. For pedestrians, it's a point of connectivity for the interior walking paths in what would otherwise be a sea of asphalt. And for vehicles, you think in the winter months when striping is maybe not so visible, they serve as traffic direction and it helps identify where the drive aisles are. Another portion of the code here actually states that the parking be divided into smaller areas that are interconnected by landscape aisles to reduce vehicle speed and protect pedestrians. We feel that the medians help attain that. So we would like to keep them, which would mean approving this waiver request, which ultimately we're still attaining that 15-foot setback, and we're not asking for an overall reduction in landscape area on the site at all. That is still attained and actually exceeded. We're just requesting that the location of that landscaping be in the medians. So
Yeah, but particularly the north island, as you can see, the yellow arrows pointing at the mail kiosk. If we had to go that extra 10 feet, we'd lose that island, and then we wouldn't have nice circulation around. In fact, I'm not sure where we put the mail kiosk for that end of the project.
that's really all I had without repeating everything that Darren just said. So if you have any questions for Norris or myself, yep.
Yeah, I have a question.
Commissioner,
Sorry. Where do you envision snow storage on that? If you're talking about the north entrance being a turnaround for the fire truck.
Yep, so snow storage is actually, it's not shown on this site, it's shown on the parking plan, but the landscape areas to the north and to the south, those are denoted snow storage areas. And then there are several places identified just throughout the site plan that would accommodate snow storage.
Yeah, we'll essentially push from the center to either end.
Okay.
We can get the snow up on that grass.
Commissioner, I have
Commissioner Torby.
I have a few questions. We'll start with bike storage. Are they covered or are they uncovered?
Uncovered. And the exterior ones are uncovered.
The exterior ones are uncovered. And it seems to me that if for some reason there were a lot of bikes that had no place to go, there are other places you could add. And so I'm making that assumption that if for some reason your assumptions are incorrect and you need more bike storage, you could do it. So, okay.
There's 4 bikes per unit or something. like
Something,
that
right?
for- yeah.
Okay. One of the requirements to issue a waiver is, or one of the conditions that must be met is there's an exceptional circumstance.
Mhm.
So could you put it as succinctly as you can for me? What is the exceptional circumstance to reduce the landscape buffer?
The 20-foot drainage easement.
Okay. Okay. Assuming the city asks for a turnaround at the north end of Samuelson, assuming, just, I don't know if they will, but just for the moment, do you think that would impact the design of your project?
Would you mean like a cul-de-sac type turnaround versus? I mean, what kind
Whatever,
of turnaround?
within the scope of what the city and the fire department might require?
So what we have shown, actually, it meets, per appendix E or D, whatever it is of the International Fire Code, it meets the hammerhead turnaround for a fire apparatus, what we have shown right now.
Okay.
They
So,
can go in the north entrance, back out.
yep, essentially that entrance is
Oh,
the pull-in.
but if, but if they have some concern or reservation about making that the way you would turn around a big piece of fire equipment going into the parking lot, rather than stay on the public right of way, would it change your project?
I don't think it would substantially.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we'd probably eliminate that entrance up there if it needed to instead be a turnaround that encroaches on the property. I mean, it would change
Okay.
a little bit of that, maybe some traffic flow. Yeah.
Okay. And speaking of that area up there, there was 2 parking spaces that seemed to be right next to the entry and exit. You see the ones I'm talking about?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
It just struck me as, I don't know, I mean, is that
We have 40 extra, why are there 2 right there?
I'm sorry?
Because we have 40 extra, why are there 2 more right there?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I guess I would ask, I think the
I'm
architects
not,
just
which
added
one
it
are we talking about?
right above the.
Way up at the upper right
Because we have
corner
the
of the
space
whole
for
thing.
them. I mean, because we have the space for them. I guess we could make it
Oh.
landscape or something, but
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I don't know, somebody make, just
it is kind of random.
thinking out
yeah,
loud.
but
Okay.
Well, keep in mind that at that north end too, those are also 3 garages. So you
Yeah,
got
no,
the
but
2 parking spaces and then
Yeah.
right to the left of those are 3 garages.
I get the 3 garages, but just the 2 that are right
Sure,
there. Yeah,
sure.
okay,
Looks a little random, I would agree.
Yeah.
okay, okay.
Guest park, who knows?
Yeah.
And then, traffic. Nicole, you put together something, and if I'm reading it correctly, you said that there's going to be a little over 1,000 daily trips from this project generated. Is that correct? Do I see that right there?
It's a long time ago.
Yeah.
They did that trip
1,069 trips?
I did do a trip generation for this. That was 2 years ago. Okay, that's how long it's taken to get to CUP. I guess so, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
I
I
I'm
mean,
just,
just follow whatever the standard is and however many. Mhm.
based on your experience, do you think that is going to have some kind of impact offsite that will require some kind of mitigation at intersections or widening roads or anything? I mean,
Sure, sure. No, I don't think so.
okay,
I mean, the only other thing, because everything for the fairgrounds is really, and there's no entrance off of Samuelson for the fairgrounds. Well, there's not an approved entrance, I should say, off of Samuelson. And otherwise there's the apartments to the south that have a very similar population and they don't have any issues, so I wouldn't think so.
okay,
And I know that an official TIS will be performed under, like, the city has their third party that performs that is required as
okay,
a part of this as well. So,
okay. And then I've
They
got,
also, one more thing, they also have pretty straight access to all the improvements that you made down there at the end of the airport to get over to that big shopping area. I mean, it's not that far from there. So that traffic patterns are pretty well taken care of.
yeah, it seems like you're going to go either down Great Northern or you're going to go,
Yeah.
over on
well, with the
Schweitzer
Amazon
Cutoff Road
facility-
and,
the Amazon facility going in.
then
there,
the
it's
Amazon
gonna
thing. I
be
mean, there's a lot of things going
a
on.
lot
Yeah.
going on, Yep.
So, okay, that all get looked at, I know, but just kind of
Yes,
wondering.
Yes,
Okay.
no, so yeah, I mean, that TGDL is really just very basic per the standards. These are the numbers that we would see. Yeah, that was a couple of years ago,
Yeah.
but an official TIS will be performed in state if we needed to change anything else, but I wouldn't think so, no.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. And if you could take us to, part of the staff report had a drawing of the concept of the stormwater.
Oh, sure.
On-site?
I don't have that, but, or I don't have that shown in.
Oh, you don't
our-
have, okay.
Because,
Well,
I
let
mean,
me-
stormwater's, I don't think really part of this portion of the process, but I'm happy to answer any questions. you
Well,
have.
it has some, for me, some somewhat novel approaches, and one is a mechanical treatment system,
Sure, yep.
which I mean, I haven't been here forever, but I haven't seen that before.
You
So
have
it's gonna,
any mechanical treatment?
for stormwater, no.
Okay.
No. So I was wondering
Are
if
we
you
doing
could
the
just
retention
describe,
basin now?
Was proposing like a storm scepter mechanical treatment, yep.
so if you could kind of just generally describe it, this all looks like it's underground because it's located on the parking lot. The whole thing is in the ground. So what is the treatment system and how do you know it's working?
So I will just start off by saying that is a preliminary plan and once we get like a geotech report and all that out there, I'll know if we can even, I mean, what
Oh,
incorporates
okay.
rates are all that. This is all very preliminary.
Oh, okay.
Because you don't want to spend too much on all these, I don't, geotech, things like that until you know you have a approved permit, right? But I will say that, so it's like a contact system. Have you heard of contact, in terms of, pipe manufacturing and things like that, contact company? You heard of them? Okay.
Is it?
Oh, perfect.
RBC or
Thank
something?
you.
There
I
it is.
don't know. who pulled this up. Thank you. So those are just generally curb inlets or not, or I guess general area inlets that would capture the stormwater and we would bring it over to this detention system. Prior to entering the detention system, it would go through a mechanical treatment unit, which is a prefab. I mean, I'm not designing it. It is a prefab system that takes out all TSS, I mean, sediment, everything is taken care of, and it's sized by these third-party companies that specialize in that, such as Contech. Then from there, once it's been treated, we can go into our detention system, which is underground, essentially a giant CMP underground detention that is for whatever volume we need.
CMP, concrete metal, corrugated metal pipe.
Yep. And so we would essentially just have it detained under there and then released at whatever that pre-development rate is
Okay.
from the site. Mostly because there's not a whole lot of space for above ground detention.
Well,
Or
and
treatment.
we've been using these underground retention facilities for about 20, 25 years. A retention basin, which we're all familiar with, a big hole in the ground with a tall grass in it that's muddy, and sometimes people make you put fences around it. It breeds mosquitoes. I mean, it's
Sure.
not a positive influence on the property.
Sure.
These underground facilities, we've had a lot better luck with. Obviously, it gives us more room to build, sure. But the other thing it does is get that eyesore out. And the underground facility, the oldest one we have is 23 years old, still working fine. I'm not guaranteeing 23 years, but the money that we have saved by not getting lawnmowers stuck in the retention basin and having to maintain fences and and I don't know whether you're familiar with it or not, but there's a certain number, the grass seed that you have to put in a retention basin at this point's about $50 a bag because it's got this, that, and the other thing in it. So the underground facilities have turned out to be a very big plus for us.
Okay. Well, I appreciate the fact that it's very preliminary. The concerns I had was that it's all underground and there's going to be total suspended TSS you referenced, and the solids is going to be collected somewhere and has to be, there's some maintenance on this. There's some monitoring on this.
Well, your advantage is that it's my problem. It's not
Right,
the
it's
city's.
not a city management.
Is it,
Right.
is it pertinent to the conditional use? I mean, that's not pertinent to the question that we're trying to answer right now, I don't think.
Conditional use permits have the list of things that we can't have a project that adversely affects neighboring properties or developments. So if this somehow would, I think that's what Commissioner Torpy's getting at, which
Sure.
it is not what you're asking for as far as a provision for the conditional use, though, although I think the setback is what brings it up to where you, yeah. So I think it's pertinent.
What setback? Are you talking about the drainage easement setback?
No, the setback of the landscape buffer.
But I think the comment was the questions I'm asking about the stormwater.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
But there was it was brought up that the stormwater system is also in conjunction with, there isn't enough space on the property.
Nope,
Because
that's a
not.
drainage easement that actually doesn't belong to the applicant. We don't get to use that drainage easement. That is, the property is
I know.
burdened by a 20-foot drainage easement. But it
I'm
has
not
nothing to
referring
do
to
with
that.
the stormwater.
I'm referring to the setback of the landscape buffer. You're asking for a 5-foot difference.
Correct.
So the 10-foot overall difference would allow for a different type of stormwater
No,
management.
no, that wouldn't have anything to do with the stormwater. Nope,
And
it's just the burden of that.
We would
drainage
not
easement.
use a different solution anyway.
Stay the same. The price of land in Sandpoint has gotten to the point where we now are going underground with stormwater instead of using above ground space.
So the system uses a dosing.
Nope, it is, there have not been full calculations run on this, but you would get full specs, or Brandon would get full specs of what this system looks like. It's a mechanical treatment. It's very, very common used. I used it on several occasions. It is well
The
used. I don't know how else to, without getting into the nitty gritty of it, but it's an
Since I
underground
maintain
system
one
that
of these,
treatments.
couple of
Okay,
these, so.
there you go.
the mechanical system is to remove the sediment. So the mechanical system is a maintenance issue. You go in, take the thing off, pull the sediment out. It's a structure which settles out the sediment before the moisture goes into the underground facility. That's how you keep it from not silting up. So it's a maintenance issue for the owner. But again, as far as that's concerned, it's much easier to clean that dirt out than it is to mow the grass in the bottom of a muddy retention basin.
And these are devices that are, I mean, they're EPA approved very commonly. They're not just something that we are going to just go have constructed for this project. They are widely accepted to meet these standards for stormwater or for treatment.
Okay, so it's
Standards.
a settling basin. It's a settling system.
Right.
to
Think of a
remove-
settling pond.
So it's not removing any
It's fancier
dissolved
though.
organics or anything in the water or anything like that.
Oh, it is.
Oh, it is. It's
Yes.
removing dissolved organics in the water.
Yes. Yes. It is a mechanical system. It isn't just a settling tank.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay.
Any more
But, I mean,
questions?
if you're curious, go look up like a storm scepter system.
Okay.
And that would give you an idea.
Sure. Thanks.
Any more questions for the applicant?
No, my questions have been answered, so.
I had a question, some questions about the
Yeah.
site.
Commissioner Weber.
Go ahead.
The site shows those sidewalks in the pink kind of extending throughout,
Yep.
and connecting to the multi-use path at that central driveway.
Correct.
I'm just noticing there's a couple, like, they're within 10 to 15 feet of the multi-use path, some sidewalks that aren't quite connected on the southern end and northern end. Are those
Those should be connected.
planned to be connected
Yep,
someday? Okay.
those will be connected.
All right.
Yep,
So I
sorry,
figured.
those should be connected.
I think seeing like the original previous plan that was submitted months ago, and this one, there's a lot of great changes, especially
Yeah.
considered pedestrian use, and I like the covered bike storage and then adding the multi-use path there.
And that multi-use path is a continuation of the existing section that Samuelson has. So there is a 10-foot multi-use path there currently. We're just extending it.
Okay.
Yeah, so it actually, I'm not sure how far, do you know if it extends all the way to Woodland? Maybe?
Brandon, city staff,
It's just a nice component if it does, but
we'll get a,
yeah. I know it is
we'll get
at
the
least
word.
continued to the southern development, so. It's not important.
oh, I heard something.
We got it.
All right. So right now, the multi-use path after this project would be completed to just short of Woodland. There's the existing older apartment complex directly to the south of this. There's what's called Samuelson Place, which is under finalizing their building construction for those apartment buildings that already have the path. There's the Samuelson Seniors to the south of that. And then there's a undeveloped lot adjacent to Woodland that won't get that multi-use path connection until that somebody comes in and develops it, or if the city decides to find funding to complete that on our own dime.
Thank you.
It almost gets you there.
And then I had another question specifically on that, like related to the vegetative buffer.
Sure.
And it's specific to that northern section, I guess. Why not keep the 15-foot buffer along the southern portion of the property? When that's less, seemed that was less encumbered by that stricter geometry.
With the median, you mean the median being larger down there?
Yeah, keeping it at 15 versus 10.
Sure. Part of it is just consistency sake, and the other part is we need a place to put these 312 bike racks. So we needed that median space. As you can see, there's, I can go back here and show you those yellow spots.
Right.
That's all the bike parking. Exterior
Right,
bike
but if
parking.
you were
So-
to shift those south on the southern median, I think you'd still have the room with a 10-foot
Sure.
reduction.
It would be possible.
Yeah. And it kind of related to that in the northern section, it took me a second to like understand the scale
Mhm.
of this parking lot. I think it was around like a 50-foot driving lane that kind of diverges into these two double loaded drives. for just a single side of parking.
Mhm.
And just thinking about how much asphalt is going into that specific area. I wonder if there is a possibility to take some of that drive aisle away, return it to the landscape buffer, and actually potentially even get quite a bit of like outdoor amenity space for these apartments and the tenants. I think it would really benefit the tenants and the owners if that, just thinking about that northern section there, if you just kind of mirrored what you have with the standard parking aisle, you'd have quite a bit of room left over.
I know exactly what you're talking about because we also looked at that layout, that
Okay.
exact layout that you are bringing up.
Mhm.
When we were, because we had originally proposed, yeah, we looked at this a few different ways with planning also, but that was one of the alternatives that we looked at. One of the concerns was that median does serve as a place for those mailbox cluster mailboxes, and being centralized in those mail kiosks. So with them being placed in the medians, Norris was saying he was able to provide full-time surveillance of those, video surveillance of those mail kiosks with them being located in the medians. So if we were to, do you remember that other layout that we looked at with having it completely, perpendicular there, we would eliminate those medians and not really have a place for the mail.
Well, the other thing is you need to look at the floor plans. If you'll note, each apartment that fronts on that 15-foot landscape buffer also has a 8-foot deep patio. So when you talk about outside living space, it's there and it's more than 15 feet. Again, each one of those units has a patio that they can sit on. I am loath to get rid of green space if I don't have to. That southern island in the middle of the parking lot, as we manage the property, I would bet you there's going to be a volleyball court out there or a basketball court, or there's going to be some place where people gather, maybe even a fire pit. We haven't really gotten that far with the plans, but ask me to get rid of green space, and I'm going to argue with you.
Yeah, I'm asking to add in green space for the
No,
landscape buffer.
Again, the patios, think about sitting on the patio of your porch,
Mhm.
8 feet deep, and then you've got another 10 feet of grass, and then you've got a 5-foot
Mhm.
sidewalk.
Sure, yeah. Okay, thanks.
Any more questions for the applicant? I just had one question. It's very close to the fairgrounds,
Mhm.
taking in consideration the noise that's sometimes generated at the fairgrounds activities. Sometimes late in the evening, people that live here are gonna understand that that's
Sure.
the reality.
Sure. Really, the extent that we had addressed that was just that making it clear that there's no parking for people maybe attending the fair, the rodeo side being the direct neighbor. Just that there would be no parking allowed on Samuelson.
My daughter's got a house on Ontario, and we sit and listen to the music festival down the street at the Ball Diamond or park, wherever it is. In my experience, it's not really going to be a very big deal. The fairgrounds is not that busy. It's not a continual problem. And I would point out that we've already looked at the train tracks on the other side of it, so
Mhm.
I don't see it as a negative.
Thank you. Okay, I think we can move on. Thank you. We will now proceed with the public hearing. Again, if you wish to testify, please complete a sign-up form and hand it to staff. As this is a land use matter, and those who on Zoom were advised during the registration to attend the meeting online, except by prior arrangement, the city does not take public hearing testimony on land use or other quasi judicial matters from those attending remotely. As I have not been advised of any such prior arrangements, all testimony this evening will be taken from those members of the public in attendance here in the room. City policy provides that the presiding officer may allow gifted time during a public hearing where you may gift your time to someone else. The person gifting may do so only one time. The person receiving time may only receive one gift for a total of up to 6 minutes. If you're gifted time, please state as much as you begin speaking and state the name of the person who gifted you their time. Both parties must be present here in chambers. Otherwise, each speaker will have up to 3 minutes. Please note that the rules of civility and decorum, as recited earlier, are in effect. Reminder, no testimony from Zoom attendees. The public hearing is now open. Madam Clerk, has anyone signed up to speak in support of the application?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we have Norris Boyd.
Okay, he already spoke. Thank you. I don't think we've ever had that.
Why wasn't she?
You double check, that's good. Madam Clerk, has anyone signed up to speak as neutral?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we have Donna Griffin.
Hello, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. My name is Donna Griffin. I'm the Executive Director for Selkirk's Ponderay Transit. I just wanted to have a consideration piece for public transit in the area. When we were always impacted when big developments go in, we get called to provide our most expensive service. So just a concern is we're already going in there 1,428 rides a year just to the one complex that's in there. So consider possibly the expansion of a fixed route piece in there, which we do not have in that room for buses, ingress and egress. Right now, our buses are 25 to 28 feet long. So for our curb to curb service people, the one that I referred to earlier, they're going into complexes and picking people up. So we have that, as we referred to the asphalt piece of it too, is to be able to accommodate those vehicles. So those considerations, please take to heart when we're looking at things like this. Thank you. Any questions for me?
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Do you currently serve Samuelson in a route in any way?
Commissioner Dunkel, Commissioner Reed Weber. We have a fixed route stop at the fairgrounds. So what that requires us to do with our FTA guidelines is we have to provide service 3/4 of a mile outside that. So we provide service to the Samuelson apartments and to the seniors living pieces in there. And those are those numbers I refer to. Right now, we're going in there to do pickups that are people who cannot reach that route. And it's mostly because of the roadways and the access, they can't get across the fairgrounds. Paratransit is a qualification piece, so they have to be qualified through their doctor to be able to do that. And we have 1,428 of those rides that we're providing that single service in and out of that complex a year right now. And we're required to do it to get our funding pieces. So yeah, nearest fixed route is at the fairgrounds.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Any other questions? All right, thank you. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. Any more as neutral?
No, Mr. Chair.
Anyone signed up to speak in opposition?
No, Mr. Chair.
Okay, are there any members of the public who have not testified who wish to do so? This will be the last opportunity for public comment before the hearing is closed. Hearing is closed. Does the applicant wish to offer rebuttal testimony to any of the comments made by the public? This will be the applicant's final opportunity to speak before the hearing is closed. Okay, commissioners, are there any final thoughts? Final questions for the applicant before the hearing is closed? Hearing none, the public hearing is now closed. Commissioners may ask questions of staff during deliberation. Commissioners?
I'll start. Question for this city in the turnaround at the end of Samuelson. I guess, have you been able to verify if that road meets fire apparatus turnaround? And are there additional just public turnaround requirements for that end of street?
Yeah, so like Nicole said, the requirements that we adopt for fire turnaround is in the International Fire Code. There's an appendix that has dimensional standards. I scaled it off of during staff review. I kind of scaled it off that drawing. It's close. They can tweak it a little bit to make it work, in my opinion. What we would probably require if they plan to use that driveway approach and part of the private property as the official turnaround, we would have to just like come to some provision that they can't gate it off. And we would have to probably include some sort of easement or other mechanism to ensure that a future property owner can't block it off or add something that obstructs that turnaround.
Thank you.
Any more questions for staff? Well, if there's no questions, then that means that somebody should be ready to make a motion. And I would entertain a motion if somebody had one.
Chair, just want to enter one thing just for consideration before someone makes a motion one way or the other. Thinking about the 15-foot waiver, to the degree the commission is inclined to move this project forward so they can go on to the building permit stage, just requesting a little flexibility that we don't get too specific with what exactly that 15 feet needs to look like, whether that's exactly 10 feet of landscaping and 5 feet of sidewalk. I think there's a little bit of wiggle room to work with the applicant on the parking field to see if there's a way to accommodate the appropriate vehicle overhang into for example, into that sidewalk. If there's a way to skinny up the drive aisles a little bit, we may be able to maintain a 5-foot sidewalk, but if not, the sidewalk might have to grow to be 6 feet, maybe 7, and therefore the landscaping would be down to 8 in front of the house. So just a little bit of flexibility on what that 15 feet look like. I think that's a typical thing we would look at building permit. But if the commission were to move the project forward and it had to be 10 feet of landscaping, for example, that kind of could make that review and the outcome a little more difficult. I think there's a little bit of wiggle room when you're looking face a building, to work with the applicant on making sure that works for cars and make sure the sidewalks aren't too encumbered by the overhang. So just food for thought.
What does the code say exactly? Is there a way to pull that up right now? Does it say specifically landscape 15 feet and sidewalk, or is it just 15 feet?
It says 15 feet, Darren, I believe it says plus a sidewalk as well. Is that right? Or is it just 15 feet of landscaping and there's a sidewalk provision in the parking ordinance next to the parking stalls themselves?
Mr. Chairman, Bill, the latter, I believe it calls for 15 feet of landscaping, and then the 5-foot walkway is a part of the parking ordinance. I'm trying to verify that right now.
Yeah, that's how we read it. So we're just trying to maintain the walkability. And I noticed that the parking spaces themselves, together with the drive aisles, there may be a little bit of wiggle room there to put some wheel stops in to prevent the cars from overhanging on the sidewalk. But if not, it'd be nice to be able to balance essentially the pedestrian mobility with the landscaping. So I think all this stems from that easement on the western edge that's for storm drainage. I think it all stems from that.
Brandon, are you familiar with the stormwater system that was referred to earlier?
Yeah, I am. It's not super common here. We haven't seen it a lot as far as I'm aware. but I've seen it in a lot of other areas, and it is probably, I would say it's probably the most common proprietary treatment system that I've seen. Um, so yeah, I mean, what would be required when we get to that final stormwater design would be, you know, the applicant's consultant would just provide proof that that they're meeting the manufacturer's recommendation for how to maintain it, how to size it correctly, and that it's going to function based on the manufacturer's recommendations. I will say that you typically will see them in like urban areas where there's literally not room to provide treatment. So that's probably why we haven't seen it a lot here. You know, you usually use it when you don't have any landscaping space to do a normal cheap swale, like was mentioned before. So
So would that help with this setback? Because is part of the setback also to absorb some, is the 15 foot of landscape, is any portion of that intended for stormwater management?
no, I don't think that that section of the code that they're asking for a waiver from is directly related to stormwater, in the sense that they don't want that 15-foot landscape buffer because it provides stormwater treatment. I think, and I'm speculating, but the intent of the code is just that you don't squeeze parking lots right up against buildings and not have room for any grass space.
Has there been any consideration with the amount of potential units, including this one, and access out of the area? And one of them being one that can be blocked by a train for sometimes extended periods. Is that, and I think we've talked about this in the past, of how much development's gone on in the area. Is there any type of a limit to the access points right now, or any consideration for that?
So I just want, just for clarity before you answer, Brandon, you have a closed record. And so the questions right now need to be related directly to just the information that you received in the record. So just be careful that the questions you're asking aren't creating additional information, given that your record is closed.
Well, we're thinking about that. I just have one small question
Mr.
about
Darby?
parking. Thank you. I assume the plans I looked at didn't have any dimensions on them, and I didn't try to scale anything. But that the distance from the parking stall itself backward, so to back out of a parking stall, I think the code says requires at least, when it's perpendicular, at least 23 feet.
That's correct.
So is there any portion of this thing that does not meet that standard, as far as you know? I couldn't tell. I mean, it says 24 there. Is that like the smallest interval, the smallest distance? And so the answer to my question is no, there's no place where it's less than 23 feet.
I'm sorry, can you just?
Right. Well, you just looked at the scale of that thing, the dimension there a moment ago. That was an example. Or the 24 feet, right to the left over there.
Yeah.
It says 24 feet. Is there any part of wherever someone's going to back out of one of these parking stalls that's not at least 23 feet before there's an obstacle or another parking stall?
Yeah, the driveway dimensional requirement listed in code is the distance required between another parking stall or a wall or another obstruction.
And it should be 23, at least 23 feet. Is that the right number?
23 feet, so that's
23
1
feet,
foot
thank you.
extra on what they have shown
Okay,
there.
okay.
But as Bill was kind of alluding to, when you have parking spaces that are directly adjacent to curbside sidewalk, so sidewalk that's right next to the curb, you typically will want to account for a 2-foot vehicle overhang. So in other words, that 19-foot parking space depth is intended to be from where the wheels stop, not the length of the car itself,
Okay, so there's an assumed 2-foot extension onto the sidewalk.
typically. So
Okay,
this gets into a little different thing, but if this were public right of way, absolutely, we have to maintain 5 foot of clear space, so we could require it. This is a little different because it's an internal parking lot.
Yeah.
However, those sidewalks are intended to be accessible routes between the buildings and the public sidewalk, which is required through federal law.
Thanks.
So if they overhang 2 feet, then the sidewalk becomes a 3-foot access, which that's the problem.
Yeah, so there's a couple ways to handle that. You can leave the sidewalk where it is. You can put a pin down curb, a removable curb out 2 feet away from that sidewalk so that the vehicle doesn't overhang the sidewalk. Then you need to make the parking space 2 feet longer.
And then you're not going to get the 23 feet anymore, right? I mean,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay.
Now you're at 22. So does that, yeah.
Well, this is
This is why I brought it up.
this is site design, so there's a lot of different moving parts in play. If the question is, can they make it work? Yeah, there's a way that you could adjust it to get an extra foot out of that if you're getting down to the foot level, by adjusting the internal islands of that design.
Because they could have 6-foot sidewalks.
That's right.
Within,
With a 1 foot.
with 23 feet, which is
Yeah.
what Commissioner Thorpe was talking about.
Yeah. And that's what I was getting at is as we go from here, should it be approved into building permit? If the condition were stated that it has to be a 5-foot sidewalk or had to be 10 feet of landscaping, for whatever reason, then we would have less wiggle room to sort of figure that out. So really the waiver is to enable, the way I'm interpreting the waiver request is to enable that 15 feet of landscaping to be, able to be encroached upon by sidewalk as necessary to accommodate, mobility of people and whether it's in a car or walking.
Commissioner Dunkel, question?
Commissioner Weber.
Will after this conditional use permit process, would this then go to a site plan review and then a building permit?
No, this suffices for the site plan review. It contains the same information that we'd be looking at in the site plan review. So from here, we just go to building permit.
Is there a process for which you to kind of work with the applicant on the site design then?
Yeah, they make a submittal. We review it against the code standards as well as the conditional use permit. You basically go through your long checklist, including whatever conditions might be imposed on the project, and step by step, issue by issue, you go down the list until it's all resolved.
So specifically the ask is 10 feet of landscape buffer. So that would have to change is what I'm hearing. It would have to be more like 8 feet.
Not necessarily. So it could be 8 feet with the parking lot shown, the parking layout shown right now with a wider sidewalk. Or it could be 10 feet with a 5-foot sidewalk and pin down curbs and adjusting the internal parking lot elements to account for that extra 2 feet of parking stall length, which could be accommodated by reducing the drive width to 23 feet on both of those drive aisles on each side and moving the curb on that interior landscape island by a foot. There's multiple ways to accomplish it.
So would a motion, may I ask, would a motion that is just generally says the combination of green space plus sidewalk may be 15 feet and shall be adjusted to accommodate the relevant codes, the city codes for parking?
That's exactly what staff is suggesting.
Yeah, good.
I believe that's maybe provided in a sample motion as well, similar language.
It's more spelled out.
Yeah, it's not, yeah.
So the city had, Chairman,
Oh,
the
Commissioner
city
Torby.
in its report had, I think, 8 recommended conditions for approval. Am I right? 8. And I don't have them committed to memory. And it'd be hard for me to make a motion that says, and these shall be the conditions if the motion is to approve with conditions. So I don't know where to go here with that.
That is gonna be included.
Do you have the staff report with you?
I didn't print out a copy, no. Does anybody have it?
We can put the conditions of approval on the screen if Darren wants to throw those up there.
That would be helpful.
That'll help us.
And Mr. Chairman, Commissioner, we will, if you choose to modify these conditions, we will make those modifications in to the report and then in the notification to the applicant. So the official record will have the conditions of approval in there as amended by the commission tonight. So in the sample motion that you've been given, we can, write a more specific condition and add that in as condition number, what would be 8, I believe. Condition number 9 to that effect. Alternatively, you can slightly modify that language in the sample motion to just say that you're approving the waiver for the 15-foot landscape buffer to allow for that amount of squish in the site plan.
Well, I would entertain a motion that followed that guideline.
I believe the sample motion in front of you says identify the waiver with regard to the 15 to 10-foot landscape buffer.
It's already in there.
That.
Yeah, I think it looks good. The third paragraph.
And that would be something I think was suggested that we modify that last sentence of the second paragraph.
No, I think
No,
it's written
it's written
exactly
there.
the way you were discussing it.
The landscape buffer between the parking area and building to 10 feet. That would imply
That's the waiver.
no
So
flexibility. Okay. Then I don't understand. I'm sorry.
Brandon, help us out. Help us to understand.
If you're not super concerned about the difference between 10 feet of grass and 8 feet of grass, the way to solve this is to modify that and say 8 feet of grass, 7 feet of sidewalk. That's the landscape buffer. Then it'll work. If 10 is good, 10 feet of grass is good enough for you, but 8 feet is not, then leave it as it is. Does that make sense? Those are the two options that I see.
Mr. Chair, you want a motion?
Yes, please.
Okay. I move that the Sandpoint Planning and Zoning Commission, after consideration of the criteria and relevant standards of Idaho Code and Sandpoint City Code, approve city application number PCUP 24-0004, a request for a conditional use permit by Little Sand Creek LLC for 156 multiple family units in 4 buildings on parcel RPS 3818000010A containing approximately 6.53 acres. In approving this application, the commission also approves the applicant's waiver request to reduce the required bike parking by 25%, resulting in a total of 237 spaces, 80 of which will locate in enclosed secure facilities within each building as depicted on the site plan. The commission further approves the waiver request to reduce the required 15-foot landscape buffer between parking area and buildings to 10 feet as depicted on the site plan. The approval of the application and the waiver requests are based upon the staff report and relevant evidence and testimony contained in the public record and are subject to the conditions of approval as detailed in the staff report and as modified the public hearing by the commission, and that's only if applicable. So, and we didn't have any modifications.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Commissioner Weber, second. This will be a roll call vote.
A little bit discussion maybe? No? Or,
We don't show discussion.
Oh.
We can have discussion.
okay. So this is as read, as written and as read, is not as suggested by, as I heard it, our city planner, and to provide the city flexibility to work with the applicant to accomplish, the best interior design. That if we specified 10 feet, it would be 10 feet and it couldn't be anything else.
I think I understand what you're saying. I think it gives the flexibility. It's also what is asked for. And I think if we approve it, that's something they can work with.
Okay.
So any more discussion? We can vote.
Commissioner Benner,
Yes.
Commissioner Weber,
Yes.
Commissioner Mitchell,
Yes.
Commissioner Dunkel,
Yes.
Commissioner Torby.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, motion passes.
Thank you.
And this also will come back to you at the next meeting in the form of a written decision, so you can also review that written decision, make sure it's consistent with what you approved.
Very well. Thank you. Old business. We'll now move on to old business with an update on the proposed parking management plan. And that will be, we'll help to understand more about that by City Planner Bill Dean and Community Planning and Development Director Jason Welker. Fellas,
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm going to join the Zoom meeting here. Just give me a moment.
can we make this like a 7-minute presentation?
Sure. Depends on how many questions you have, or
I see no
Okay,
questions.
Commissioner.
Good.
Okay.
go to the top of that. Did Haley leave?
Sound like
Oh,
Luke
there we go.
Garrett.
I'm muted. Okay. Let me start my presentation here. Back to the beginning. Okay. All right. Good evening, Commissioners. Why is my camera on? Sorry, my face is on the screen right now. Stop video. There we go. It's been 3.5 months since I presented an early draft of a parking management plan to you back in January. And I'm going to give you an update tonight on the progress and changes that have occurred in the last 3.5 months after extensive community engagement. Part of this, bless you, Bill. Part of this presentation will include a little bit of the theory that has been kind of guiding our development of the parking management plan and paid parking policy over the last few months. And we're going to start with the theory first. So we're going to, if I can control my screen, we're going to talk about a concept called effective capacity in parking facilities. And there's a rule in the urban planning realm called the 85% rule. This is the percentage of parking facilities that, when occupied, are considered to be the effective capacity of the parking facility. So at 85% capacity, the rule can be thought of very simply. That equates to roughly 1 empty parking space per side of a city block. The principle here is very simple. When an individual drives into a city, we want it to be convenient and easy for them to find a parking space close to where they're going, within 1 block. When there's, at any given time, on average, 1 empty parking space per block, imagine pulling into Sandpoint, you take a left on 3rd, boom, you're going to the hardware store, you can find a parking spot. You don't need to circle, you don't need to drive around, cruise for available parking spaces. When a city's parking infrastructure is at 85% occupancy, it's considered effective and optimal to some extent. Anything below 70%, it represents an inefficient use or an overbuilt supply of parking. Anything over 85%, we're going to see that overutilization of parking, and we see the cruising and frustration and the congestion and the noise and the pollution of people driving around inefficiently looking for parking. So this 85% rule is quite interesting when you start looking at parking management plans, because what we're really trying to achieve in a parking management plan is to bring our city public parking infrastructure closer to that 85% rule. And we happen to have facilities that are either far in excess of 80% at their peak occupancy, and some that are far below the 85% level at peak occupancy. So this slide shows from our 2022 parking study, which, by the way, was conducted over a week in July. So this is peak season. They observed throughout the week and throughout the times of the day when peak occupancy levels were being reached across multiple parking facilities. So let's start at the upper left-hand corner. That's downtown on-street parking. That's 1,097 parking stalls. At the peak hour, which was noon on the weekdays, actually weekends have lower occupancy at on-street stalls because many businesses aren't open. Law offices, accountants, architects, these firms generally don't demand parking on weekends. So that the peak occupancy in the on-street stalls downtown is 57% at the noon hour on weekdays. In the upper right is the off-street parking downtown. This is mainly our city parking lot. So the 121 spaces at the city parking lot reach around 83% occupancy, right at that effective capacity during the peak hour at noon on weekdays. When we go down to the waterfront lot, remember this study was done in July, so not surprisingly, massive demand for waterfront on-street and off-street parking. On-street parking on the waterfront really is Dock Street. This is the Windbag Marina that has about 49 parking stalls. You can see 0 occupancy throughout all hours of the day in July at that Windbag Marina parking facility. The City Beach parking lot, likewise, was at 97%. You saw some of this data in my presentation to you a few months ago. So Bill and I have been diving into these numbers with some depth, and we've determined that we have at our peak occupancy at our street parking downtown, we have around 600 out of 1,054 general use stalls being occupied. I mentioned 1,097 a moment ago. That's because we have around 43 handicap, 20-minute time limit loading zone parking stalls. So we have 1,054 parking stalls within the downtown zone that are at 57% occupancy, meaning we have 600 stalls. So we asked the question, well, how many stalls do we have available downtown before we are at our effective capacity? And that's that 85% number. Basically, there's room to accommodate 296 additional vehicles at peak hour before we reach that effective capacity, beyond which we have to start worrying about parking strain downtown. So just keep that number in mind, that 296 additional vehicles. Not to say that that's something we're aspiring towards, but it does point out that we have considerable excess capacity in our on-street parking facilities downtown. Now, as we know from the previous slide, we are well beyond our effective capacity at our on-street parking stalls. So that brings us back to the purpose of the parking management plan. We have a really interesting opportunity over the next few weeks to observe and survey the impact of what would happen if 100 additional vehicles were suddenly parked on street downtown. There's all sorts of development happening in Sandpoint on seemingly panic in our community over the effect of additional demand for street parking downtown. Well, everybody probably knows what happened yesterday. We closed the city parking lot for the first time in decades. Except for private events, that parking lot has been available since 1976 when it was acquired by the city. 121 parking spaces occupied at the noon hour at 83% equals exactly 100 additional vehicles on the street over the next 3 weeks while that parking lot is being repaved. So we decided to go downtown and have a look and see how this increase in demand of 100 additional vehicles for street parking looks. I wanted to witness the failure of our street parking facilities downtown. So I went down and I did a survey and started taking pictures of what you're going to see is a frightening level of vacancy in our street parking downtown. So you'll recognize most of these locations. You've got Oak Street there looking up towards Matchwood. You've got the private parking lot at the corner of 5th and Pine, which has 56 stalls, of which 6 were being used at the noon hour yesterday. These pictures were all taken yesterday. You'll recognize some more parking facilities here. That's the ITD lot. There were probably around 100 empty parking spaces in the ITD lot yesterday at the noon hour. Looking down, you've got Farm and Park on the left, about a dozen empty parking spaces along Church Street there, or sorry, Oak Street with Farm and Park where the farmer's market is. There's the Sandpoint Center. Plenty of empty parking spaces, even with the city parking lot closed. Continuing, you can see Farm and Park from the other side there. There's the parking lot itself. On 3rd Avenue, there were upwards of 6 or 7 empty parking spaces around the closed parking lot, despite the displacement of 100 vehicles. Again, parking space right in front of Joel's at the lunch hour, very unusual. I was actually surprised to see that one. And just continuing around the blocks between 2nd Avenue and 5th Avenue, we saw vacancy rates in excess of 40 to 50%, meaning that even at this peak noon hour, there was quite a lot of empty parking downtown. So some observations: with 100 cars displaced by the closure of the city parking lot, street parking between 2nd and 5th Avenue remains well below effective capacity. On average, there were 4 to 5 empty spaces per block, far more than the 1 space recommended for an efficient parking system. So this leads me to believe that the perceived street parking challenges in Sandpoint are really the result of inefficient utilization, not the supply of spaces available. So when I talk about utilization, we're talking about this image from our 2022 parking study. You saw this one in the presentation I gave you in January as well. We're looking at it again. Basically, orange and red are parking facilities that are beyond their effective capacity. Blue, green, and yellow are parking facilities that are below their effective capacity, blue being 0 to 50% occupied. This is, again, at the noon hour during the peak summer day in July, when demand is at its greatest for street parking downtown. So observe those blue lines which dominate this map. That is where 0 to 50% of street parking stalls are being occupied during the peak hour. So notice, of course, the red and orange areas, 1st Cedar out to Alder, between 1st and 2nd, 90 to 100% occupied. So when people talk about the shortage of parking in town, it's really a utilization issue, not a supply issue. It's that where people desire to park is overutilized under the current model. And that, of course, applies to our off-street parking facilities. I don't need to show you those maps. You saw that they're between 83 and 100% during the peak times in the summer. So since our presentation in January, we have done quite a bit of community outreach. This is a summary for you: 4 presentations to the various committees and commissions at the city. Presentation, discussion, and survey at the Chamber of Commerce meeting. We had about 60 businesses represented in that meeting. And then a presentation discussion in these chambers with the Downtown Business Association, followed by a survey that went out to their 40 members. And then a separate community survey, which had 1,811 responses, 935 of whom reported to be Sandpoint city residents. So with that data, we were able to extract quite a lot of interesting information. So here are some key takeaways from the outreach that we've done. Excuse me. somewhat surprisingly, and maybe in contrast to some of the community dialogue right now, is that most respondents did not feel that availability of parking was an issue downtown. 72% said that they either were neutral or felt that they were satisfied or very satisfied with the availability of parking. Only 28% expressed dissatisfaction. When it came to the condition of our parking facilities, 58% rated them as fair, poor, or very poor, with only 42% saying that our off-street parking facilities were in good or very good condition. Hopefully with the repaving of the city parking lot, that impression will change in the next few weeks. A plurality, not a majority, but more than any other option, city residents chose paid parking as their preferred means for maintaining and improving city parking facilities. The other options were state and federal grants, city property taxes, and do not maintain them. In other words, sell or privatize, lease them to private developers, that sort of thing. That was a very unpopular choice, not surprisingly. People want their parking available. Only 18.8% of non-city residents favored user fees, with city property taxes being their preferred means of paying for parking facilities. Of course, they don't pay city property taxes. 41% of city residents said that they would be willing to purchase one of the parking passes as proposed in the draft plan. 30% of non-city residents would be willing to buy a pass. So fairly high numbers there. Okay, here are the changes. And I'm not going to show you the parking management plan. It's everything in red, if you had a chance to look at it, has changed since the first draft. I tracked all the changes since the first draft. So in your packet tonight was the updated parking management plan. I'm not going to show it to you because I expect you to have done your homework. Everything in red is what has changed, but I summarized it here for you. So we've tweaked the times proposed for the parking passes. I think when I first presented to this body, the proposal was for 2 hours of free parking included for both the city resident and the non-city resident pass. Of course, the most overwhelming feedback we've received is that more time would be nice. So the current draft is for 3 hours in the downtown lots for city resident pass holders and 6 hours in the city beach parking lot. 2 hours in the city downtown lots for non-city resident pass holders and 3 hours at the city beach lot. We have since added boat launch fees based on research in Kootenai County and Coeur d'Alene, both of which have public boat launches that charge fees.
Does that include Memorial?
Yes, of course. Yeah, you'd have to do both. Otherwise, you'd create all the demand over at one. And we have merged the proposed downtown business and resident passes and increased that to a $40 monthly fee for a resident or business employee pass downtown. Another significant change, and I'm actually looking for feedback on this from you guys tonight, is the elimination of the 4-hour time limits on periphery downtown street parking stalls to incentivize employees to park further out from the 1st and 2nd Avenue commercial core. We heard a lot of anxiety from downtown employees during our outreach with businesses about the what they call the 2 or 3 hour shuffle and the need to run out from their shops and move their car every few hours to avoid getting a ticket. So why don't you just park further out? Well, then it's a 4-hour shuffle and I have to run 5 blocks instead of 1 block or 2 blocks. So the 4-hour time limit was actually creating a disincentive for downtown employees to park on the periphery. That's really what we want to incentivize. That's where the highest levels of vacancy are. We want downtown employees to park a little bit further out and not worry about getting a ticket over the lunch break. And then a big one, this is a really big one, and it's something Bill's been working a lot on, is actually an ordinance amending our off-street parking requirements for the downtown parking exempt zone to bring, this is another controversial one that we're going to be talking about, I want some feedback on, to bring parking requirements back for residential development. Okay, I'm sure you're all aware we have a parking exempt zone that encapsulates about 6 by 6 blocks of downtown Sandpoint. Currently, no new development, residential or commercial, is required to provide any off-street parking within that zone. So there's a proposal to discuss tonight, and depending on your feelings, we might bring it back to you as an ordinance at a future meeting to consider for adoption.
So could I make a comment there?
Yeah, sure.
I think that zone needs to be expanded rather than decreased if you want infill in development in the downtown.
Can you speak into your mic?
Oh, yeah, sorry. I think that the no parking requirement needs to be expanded rather than contracted if you want development in the downtown area, residential development. I mean, you're showing us pictures of empty parking spaces at noon on Tuesday or whatever, Tuesday. I know there's a lot of bad public discourse over that farm and development, which we're not discussing tonight, but if you want someone to develop, for instance, like in the granary district or on Superior, they're not going to do that with parking requirements at 1.5 vehicles per 1,200 square feet.
Sure. Yeah, we'll discuss a little bit more later on. I've got some questions for the committee
Yeah,
that I hope
okay.
to get a lot of input from. Okay. All right, so just thinking about how this all fits with, the future and why we're talking about parking management today. First, a little background. Sandpoint's parking exempt zone was adopted in 2009. Since that time, there hasn't really been much residential development downtown. Commercial development is another story. We talked about all the examples. I'm just from the Hive to McDuff's to Joel's to the Bellwood building, the Coachella. These are projects that would have required vast parking lots if the parking requirements from pre-2009 had been applied at the time that those building permits were pulled. The provision of those parking lots would have completely changed the experience of downtown Sandpoint, and we'd have large areas of asphalt that today would be in the place of historic buildings and other, more valuable commercial uses down there. So the capacity that we do have on our city streets, 296. I mean, this is very theoretical, okay? And in reality, if we drop 296 cars down on city streets, it would be very noticeable right now. But according to this, effective capacity concept, there's really capacity for an additional 296 vehicles during the peak hour downtown. On the other hand, off-street parking is well beyond its effective capacity of this free to park system. The original intent of this parking management plan was to solve that utilization problem, to reallocate some of that demand for parking from the free parking lots through implementing a paid parking policy onto the relatively abundantly available street parking, so that through a permit system or hourly parking for non-permit holders. So this plan does propose continuing the exemption for commercial development, but requiring residential developers to either provide parking or to pay an in lieu fee. We do have parking in lieu fees in the city. They're rarely taken advantage of. As you saw tonight, projects are more likely to come through with more parking than necessary. The Samuelson project is proposing 40 more parking spaces than is required by their code. But when you get downtown where real estate prices are excessive, the requirement for off-street parking can be burdensome, and giving developers the opportunity to pay an in lieu fee is something we'd like to continue to offer in that parking exempt zone. Okay, so we've encountered a lot of questions from the public, and a lot of questions have come up on the staff level as we've worked on this effort. And these are some of those questions that I just wanted to put before you tonight. What kind of development will we see in the years ahead? Commercial development downtown creates more demand during those peak hours, whereas residential creates a base level of demand. That's something we need to consider as we approach parking management. Base level, meaning you're more likely to see cars 24 hours a day or overnight, whereas currently the streets are pretty empty after 9 p.m. when restaurants start to close. Will additional public parking be needed? We have very limited opportunities to provide additional public parking. There's the possibility of exploring the addition of curbside parking along Fifth Avenue. That would be a road diet, narrowing that 92-foot asphalt drive lane with 5-6 lanes from Cedar all the way up to Larch. Several hundred on-street parking stalls could be accommodated along Fifth Avenue while simultaneously creating traffic calming measures so that, where the speed limit is 25 and everybody drives 40, you'd be more likely to see people driving 25 if you had street parking through there, narrowing those drive lanes. That's something that would require coordination with Idaho Transportation Department, and there's no guarantee we could actually do that. But as far as we can tell, that's the only place we can really accommodate more, public parking downtown without acquisition of land, unless we build a parking structure. A parking structure at the city lot, based on current estimates, would be around $30,000 per stall, meaning if we went up to 3 levels of structured parking, we'd be looking at around a $10 million project, depending on what other commercial components there are in that project. It could be far, far more than $10 million as well. So let's say the city did want to pursue a public parking structure. The only future that includes a public parking structure downtown is one where we have paid parking, right? The parking in lieu fund could generate revenue. Let's say we had 100 new residential units downtown in the next 5 years. That would generate, if they chose to pay the in lieu fee, few $1 million that could go towards a parking structure. Paid parking passes would provide revenue for ongoing payments of any new facility the city chose to construct. So these are just some questions that we've explored internally and for you to consider as we, look at adopting a parking management plan. And here's where I ask you guys some questions. So I'm going to open it up for discussion and hopefully get some feedback and insight and thoughts on where you guys as representatives of the community here stand on some of these questions. They're the questions that we're asking internally as we've looked at these, maps and the results of our parking study, and just anecdotally and hearing from the community about the perceived parking strain downtown, understanding that's really about utilization and where people are trying to park. We started to realize that there's probably a reason Sandpoint had parking meters on 1st and 2nd Avenue and Cedar Street for 80 years. Or I guess it was from the 40s until the early 90s. So about 50 years, there were parking meters downtown Sandpoint. So there's the question here, should we be looking at bringing paid parking back to those very congested blocks of downtown, not all of downtown, but just where you saw the orange and red areas on that map? So some pros and cons, you're really not going to get downtown employees parking on those streets if there's an hourly parking fee for that parking. It's going to create a very strong incentive for them to go out onto the periphery. So we wouldn't have that 2-hour shuffle for downtown employees. Despite what a lot of people think, paid parking around the country has been observed to dramatically improve business for downtown businesses because it creates more turnover. People aren't going to go park and leave their car all day or linger at a restaurant. You're going to be more likely to come back and vacate your parking space, freeing it up for another customer at a downtown business. And of course, it would generate more revenue for the city if we had paid parking on a few blocks downtown. The cons, number one, people are going to hate it. Community pushback will be strong, and there will be costs, of course, mostly just upfront fixed costs as far as the installation of the technology, and then some enforcement costs from a community resource officer standpoint, having to go, confirm the parking fees have been paid. So that's one question I'd like to discuss with you tonight. Should we look at the other questions first, or does anybody have thoughts on this first one? Mr. Benner.
Well, I just, one question is, do you know how much the meters were bringing in revenue back in the days? And the reason I bring that up is I'm used to paying, when we go up to Nelson all the time, we pay.
Mm-hmm. Nelson's, by the way, a city of 10,000 people. Very similar.
Very, very
economy.
similar.
Yeah.
And,
it's our sister city.
yeah, and you pay.
Yeah. Sure.
$2 for an hour.
I've learned a little bit about how parking meters in the 20th century worked. The model was that cities were basically granted the meters up front by the companies that provided them, and they usually take a few years to pay back the cost of the meters, and then it was all profit from then on for cities. But I have no data because I think these were, from what I've heard, the city stopped enforcing the parking meters around 85, 86 or so, and then uninstalled them around 1990. So that was 40 years ago. I don't have any data on whether how much money they were making the city at that time.
Just curious, because I think, from my standpoint, I think parking meters actually is a good way to generate revenue.
And just so you all know that it wouldn't be feed the meter with a coin type situation. There'd be one, per 6 or 8 parking spaces. You enter your license plate number. It's that sort of system. Maybe a modern, efficient parking management system, not the old fashioned meters at every single stall.
Do you know how much each kiosk costs, or?
Around $3,000. But again, these are the things that, if the city were to choose to implement a policy like this, there's so many different technology providers that have different rates and different models, whether it's 1 per block, 1 per 4 spaces, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And similar to the previous century, it would be something that we'd, either be paying back over time with our parking revenues, or we pay an annual service fee or something, a percentage of our parking revenues. So
I don't think you have to have kiosks anymore. It's just signs with
Can be.
QR code and,
yeah,
but every space needs to be labeled and
you can pay
numbered.
by text.
Yeah,
Yeah, I've seen those. Just saw them last weekend, actually, a pay by text model.
yeah, it's super easy. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, by the looks of this picture, put the meters up for the for the 50s affair, and those are all 50s cars.
People will think they're just like ornamental if we put
Yeah.
them up for loss in the 50s. A throwback. Yeah.
That's a good topic of, during Lost in the 50s, all that downtown core has nowhere to park. It's all closed off. And people find, I mean, thousands of people find places to park, which it gets out into the residential areas out of the core. But that's an example of, you know, if there was no parking downtown, people are still gonna come if, you know, they'll find a way.
Sure.
And it also highlights the fact that well, not a fact, but I believe a lot of the people parking on street or anywhere in Sandpoint are out of town residents. I mean, not everybody that lives in town lives close enough to like walk or, you know, but conceivably, a lot of people in town do live close enough to not have to drive to where they want to go downtown. So, and I think people who do live in town are maybe more open to the idea of parking a block or two away than parking right in front of the business. So I think the community pushback that we're possibly seeing is, or will see, is rooted in people who are used to not paying for it anyway. So, I think the residents who really actually have some skin in the game would love to see some help paying for it and a solution to make it to where there might be more parking available downtown at any time of the day or any event.
And you were only talking about those red zones, right? Like first between Main and Main and Cedar and
Yeah.
First and Second.
Yeah.
But there's still plenty of free
You
parking.
can kind of see those, the 2-hour zones there in orange on that map. It wouldn't be all the 2-hour zones, probably just where the capacity is, you know, well beyond its optimum level.
Yeah. I mean, I know that, I mean, talking to some business owners down there, like they dislike you know, the fact that there's not turnover,
Mhm.
right? Because then oftentimes in between Main and Cedar on First, you know, it's like people are parking there for 3-4 hours at a time, you know, because it's not every day that there's enforcement, but yeah,
And the idea behind a 2-hour zone is that there will be turnover.
right.
The going to paid parking creates even stronger incentive to turn over quicker, right? Because
Yeah.
you could say, you know, maximum 3 hours, but you're paying for each of those hours. So it, you know, the marginal cost is not zero anymore up to 3 hours. It's an additional $2 an hour, or $1.50 an hour, whatever it is.
Right. And do you know how much resources the city allocates towards the parking enforcement now?
I'd have to get it, I'm sure our police chief could come up with like a, you know, labor hour estimate, but it's 2 times a day. As far as I understand, the community resource officers go down and do their
Mhm.
patrol, and they issue quite a lot of parking tickets right now.
Yeah,
Yeah. So that's another way to look at it, right? Parking's not really free down in these time restricted zones right now. I did a survey, in my survey of downtown business owners, over half say that either they or their employees have received parking tickets downtown. Those start at $50 and go up to $150. So for your third parking ticket, you're looking at $150 if you exceed your 2 or 3 hour time limit. Any other thoughts from the commissioners on this idea of possibly paid street parking in those most congested blocks downtown? I welcome any feedback, because if we implement that in a next draft of this, I want to be able to point at you guys to say it was your idea.
Well, you can point at me because I'm in favor of it.
Okay.
Yeah, me too.
Chairman, just a quick question back for Jason. I mean, it seems like the biggest con would be the community's perception of this and as it may color the entire parking management plan. And what's your sense I mean, on its face, it seems a good idea, except for that, where it may trigger a stronger response to the whole plan and cause the city to perhaps have to, you know, modify those plans or not. I don't know, but would you think this is going to be a big deal for people, the community?
I think the more controversial issue in the community was probably City Beach.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm hopeful that this latest draft addresses those concerns largely by extending the time limits to 6 hours or 3 hours for pass holders.
Well, if this doesn't have any reasonable threat to the larger plan, then I'd be for it.
Okay. Okay. Shall I move on to the next question?
I just, it'd be good to see a, a prospectus or, a business plan that
Yeah.
showed, is our enforcement and our cost of implementing this gonna be, 3 or 4 years before we see any money out of it, that's
Sure.
gonna get some community pushback with, pretty good reasoning behind it. I would probably be a pushback on that. But I think these days there's ways to not have a bunch of upfront costs. I think the kiosks are a problem because somebody's gonna have to maintain them. I'm sure they don't last forever. And they sound expensive. I don't know. It seems like you'd have to have a lot of them. Yeah, and I think I think there's alternatives. So the enforcement part of it, like you said, right now, if somebody's there 3 hours, they could cost them $15, right?
50.
$50. $50?
50 is your first ticket. Second is 100 and then 150.
Wow. Okay, well, that's an expensive hour. So, I mean, in a way, we're lowering the costs if you think about it.
Could be, yeah.
And you could pay for the whole day if you wanted to.
Yeah, that's
Right.
something, I'm not sure what best practices are there, whether it would be, pay per hour up to 3 hours or up to 4 hours. Yeah, I don't know what other cities are doing in that case. That's something that when we get to the implementation stage, we'd have to hash out.
Yeah, I think that would be important because some of those employees, they might just want to park all day but there is a pass for.
Yeah, the current draft proposes that the downtown business employee parking pass gives them all day parking in 3 hour zones. So it gets them off of the busiest streets downtown and onto those streets that are closer to 50% capacity.
That's the $40 a month.
And the city parking lot. So for $40, unlimited parking at the city parking lot and in the 3 hour parking zones and 4 hour parking zones if we keep those.
Yeah, sounds good to me.
Okay. All right, next question. This one's a big one. The parking requirements for residential. So currently residential is exempt, just like anything else within the parking exempt zone. I don't know if you had a chance to look at it, but the current draft of the parking management plan, there was also a proposed ordinance in your packet tonight that there was multiple pages that went into the actual legal language around this. The proposal is to tie parking requirements to square footage of residential in the commercial area. That's not how we do it outside of the commercial zone. But the reasoning here is that the parking requirements are basically propose one parking stall, off-street parking space required per 1,000 feet of residential. So if you're building a 1,500 square foot luxury condo downtown, you're going to be required to provide 1.5 parking spaces per unit. So 4 of those units, you have to provide 6 parking spaces. On the other hand, if you're providing 300 square foot efficiency apartments downtown, you're required to provide 1 parking space for every 3 units. So what is the rationale behind this? It's to create an incentive, and in a way, it's a way to kind of continue to subsidize parking for more efficient workforce housing type apartments that are going to be for local workers primarily, and require those developers providing, the higher end product to provide a higher level of parking commensurate with the kind of market that they're building for. So there was an example in the draft parking management plan that showed, a building with 20 500 square foot apartments would be required to provide 10 parking spaces, whereas a building with 16 or what was it, 15, 1,200 up to 1,600 foot apartments would be required to provide 21 parking spaces. So there's a little bit a disproportionate requirement there, but you can think of it kind of like a progressive parking requirement, right? That the more square footage each unit is, the more parking spaces are required. But the trade-off is some residential developments would not be required to provide 1 parking space per unit if those units are smaller than 1,000 square feet. Currently, the requirement is 0 spaces per unit. So this would be a move towards increasing off-street parking for residential development. There are arguments for and against bringing parking requirements back for residential. The arguments for bringing them back. Some community, there seems to be right now community support for uniform parking requirements across the city. In other words, not discriminating against, developers who are just outside that white line on our map versus those that are inside. More residents will put some strain on off-street parking and street parking downtown. And in lieu payments could generate significant nest egg for future public parking expansion. The ability to pay in lieu for some of this parking requirement is how the city envisions perhaps raising hundreds of thousands of dollars that could in the future be put towards expanding public parking facilities. Arguments against bringing parking requirements back to downtown. We know that street parking is well below its effective capacity right now. So there's actually room for more vehicles to park on the streets downtown. Requirements for off-street parking make certain types of residential development, such as workforce housing or efficiency housing, less feasible and undoubtedly will increase the rents for that housing. The reason rents are going to be cheap in a parking exempt zone to a large extent is because land wasn't needed for off-street parking facilities. Rather, it was used for providing housing. Okay, there's a trade-off there. You're going to provide housing for cars or provide housing for people. Another possible argument against is that encouraging downtown residential development close to jobs, creating both a supply of workers and a demand for goods and services downtown promotes a very specific vision from our comprehensive plan. And this is right out of our recently adopted comp plan. Chapter 5, Goal 1F, explore alternatives to parking requirements to encourage a variety of housing types for a broad spectrum of income levels and age groups. So the parking exemption is an alternative to a parking requirement that we currently have in code that provides a broader range of housing for people of different income levels and age groups. So just something to think about as we consider.
Can I ask you a question now?
ordinance.
Sorry, this is my wheelhouse,
Yeah.
right? I mean, as, like, who's gonna do the development of low-income housing downtown? It's gonna be somebody who's also capable of paying in lieu fees, right? I mean, like Mr. Wells, or what was his name? Our applicant earlier.
Boyd, you know.
Mr. Boyd, thank you. I mean, he's capable of putting in 40 more spaces of parking. We're putting in 40 more spaces of green space out there. You know, those apartments at 1,000 square feet are gonna cost the same dollars per square feet to develop and rent as a 1,600 square foot unit. That's, you know, maybe it's gonna be a second home or whatever. I just don't see the benefit of, I don't see people coming downtown. I mean, if you're looking at how much dirt costs downtown, like if you were to redevelop Joel's now to include residential units above Joel's, you couldn't do it. Because you can't provide 4 parking spaces for.
Well, now you could, because there's no parking requirement for
Right,
residents.
I know, right, and if
But
you
under the proposed
institute the proposal, we
revision,
can't,
it would make that kind of development much harder.
yeah,
Oh, sorry.
oh, sorry. Yeah, I mean, it would be impossible to build, you know, a second and third story above Joel's now and develop it if you implement these new requirements. I mean,
Quite possibly.
you know, and you can't just build kind of micro units for, I mean, who's gonna live in all of these micro units with no kitchens? I mean, I know the workforce is, but I don't know, it seems like based on the price of dirt downtown and, or just the price to get into development downtown, it's gonna be very hard to attract lower income housing down there. And lower income housing people also have cars to drive to Safeway or Super One or whatever.
Like, there's like a scale to consider here, like over so many units or such square footage that at that point, if you have a larger property to work with, maybe then you'd implement parking requirements for that lot.
Like a coverage percentage or something.
Yeah, if you have like, I don't know, a quarter acre or 10,000 square foot lot versus like a 30,000 square foot lot, you have a little more space to work with on that 30,000 square foot lot.
Mhm.
If you're maxing out or wanting to maximize housing, it's like you have the ability to put in parking versus a smaller lot, like the Joel's scenario.
Mhm.
So I think there's something to consider about that with the scale, like it kicks in at a certain level of development. So there's 2 on the board. I think there's like a bigger question with parking and just getting around in Sandpoint without a vehicle. Like, how feasible is it to, go to the store, go to have all your needs met currently with our transit system, with our sidewalks, with our network, like what are our alternatives? And it doesn't seem like currently we're really investing in growing those aspects of mobility. I think we have existing services, but I think that'd be something the city could really promote and push and at the same time as reducing these parking requirements. I think that's something that's just part of the conversation.
Perhaps it could be argued that embracing the parking exemption is a big step towards promoting multimodal transportation, because over-parking a community just creates less barriers to people relying on automobiles. And in response to your idea that, like, you know, people living downtown are likely to still have cars, that's acknowledged. The implicit outcome of a parking exemption is that the city is providing the parking through our on-street and off-street parking facilities in order to relieve developers of the burden of developing that parking, which increases development costs and therefore increases eventual rents, reducing availability of residential space downtown in exchange for more off-street parking spaces. So looking at our public parking facilities, it's a statement of values if we continue with the parking exemption for all development downtown, the value being that we value real estate development that provides housing for humans over real estate development that provides parking for cars.
I think part of the picture here is urban form is a big component of the discussion. We haven't just called it that, but you know, cities solve the parking problem for their downtowns. You're trying to create a district that has those, you know, forces of cumulative attraction where you can come and do the things you do in downtowns. You won't be able to do that if we cover it over with parking lots. I think we're all aware of that. So how do you best get that district to function? I think what we're trying to do right now, part of it is just looking at the assets that you have. Just like 50 years ago, we may have had parking meters in downtown. Well, maybe 50 years from now, we'll have something else. So keep in mind, we're solving a problem for right now, taking a look at how we can best use the assets we have. And the numbers tell us that we can't actually have some more housing or additional businesses downtown without creating this burden for everybody in the district, just because we have the extra supply. If we didn't have that supply, I think we'd be having a little bit different conversation. So part of this is looking ahead. Do we want to start collecting a nest egg if people are going to take advantage of the in lieu? And how do you size that payment so that it's not going to be disincentive to see the development to begin with? So it's a tricky question, but in the end, it's really important for us not to lose sight of what the urban form is going to look like. You know, the outcome of these decisions that we make on what requirements we put on private development. It's a district. It should be solved as a district. And that's just, you have to look at it differently than you would if you're looking at a project that's over on Division or something. That's not a district. The downtown is a district, and we have to look at it as a whole. Any individual site is going to be difficult to arrive at a solution because you're not looking at the entirety of it. If you're just looking at a project by project by project, you just can't do that in a downtown. You're going to back yourself into a corner. So really what the question here gets at whether or not there should be the beginnings to amass some funding for future solutions for capacity, knowing we have roughly 300 units. How long will that take to see 300 units or the equivalent downtown? I don't know. How many have we built? How many units have we built in the last 20 years downtown? Not that many. So this could be a long ways out before you see that type of investment in residential development in the core. So
is the goal residential development in the core?
I think your comp plan says that. I think that the idea of bringing population that's proximate to your principal place for entertainment and food and eateries is a number one key to downtown revitalization, regardless of where you are. You want disposable income proximate to your shops. That equals higher rents, a competition for space, activity on the street, et cetera.
Has anybody spoken to in your crew, spoken to developers about what's limiting their capacity to develop residential in the core district?
Parking is a big part of it.
And which part of the parking?
the fact that you have to provide it. If you have to provide parking, that quickens the conversation. You know, I've had this conversations this week, people looking to invest and trying to understand where parking is headed.
Yeah. Commissioner Torpey, go ahead.
Okay, couple of thoughts I have. One is that I think, given the cost of land and building and connection and impact fees, that it's unlikely you would have employee housing downtown. So I view this as something other than employee housing. And thinking back to last week when we had a conversation about revising impact fees, there was reference made to sort of a percentage of the cost of a unit. And I would view any in lieu fee as an impact fee because chances are it's easier to write a check for $25,000 than try to build a parking garage in your development for housing. So this would just be added to the water, the sewer, the parks, the whole program. And in my head, I think it would still be below the threshold that was discussed in terms of the percentage of the cost of building that unit when we had that discussion. So based on the comment made by a builder, it would not by itself materially affect the decision-making of a developer, that you would have this $25,000 cost, which to me is a lot of money, but if you're spending money to sell a unit of dwelling unit that's very expensive, then it sort of, you know, is crumbs on the floor as was described. So it's a perspective that it's had. And the 296 available units, sort of as an argument against, those have value. And those are exactly the places that we hope people who are parking at City Beach will use, so that those available spaces help accomplish another goal that is intrinsic in the whole parking plan, is to make more spaces available at City Beach. And if we start giving those away, then we shoot one foot at least, if not both. So I would be in favor of this only if the money that you collect from this goes towards enhancing and adding parking. Consider the parking garage over the thing you're just doing this month, you know, 3 stories up. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you.
Commissioner Benner.
Well, just kind of to follow up on, thanks to Reed here on, we seem to overemphasize vehicles and not the pedestrians or getting around. Jason knows I'm very in favor of opening up the city to golf carts and things like that. If you're worried about building units downtown, you can put 4 golf carts in a little lean-to in the back, no problem. I think it would really, in the long run, looking at the sustainability of the community here, I think we need to look at a focus going away from the automobile more so than encouraging it. And if you want to go back to our sister city, 10,000 people, they ride buses. They have more e-bikes up there now than we have population, basically. So, and they have meters, parking meters, but most of those are for people outside of the city coming in. People in the city ride the bike, or ride bikes, ride the bus, or walk. I mean, here you talk about, you know, walking from Walmart's parking lot to the store and around the store and back. Up there, they'll walk a mile up a sheer cliff of mountainside almost and back to town, carrying packs on their backs. And this is not just young kids. This is elderly people and everybody. So I think we need to kind of maybe, in the long run, same thing we talked about in the comprehensive plan a little bit, shift away from the old polluters and come up with some other ideas. You know, we could sure open up the downtown if the whole First Street was walking. You could double the size of your stores down there. So anyway, that's mine.
Okay, thanks.
So
Bill, did you want to add something to that?
I just had
Oh, go
one
ahead.
thing, kind of piggyback on that too, is we've all spent time in, much larger cities where, an office building has, how many units of office space and et cetera. And there's about 25 parking spaces maybe combined around the whole block, which also is sharing spaces with another 4 or 5 buildings. So I don't think, and there is residential. There's residential in every larger city. So not that we're a larger city, but at some point that transition, and I think that's what the other commissioners are getting at too, is, we maybe now is the time to plan ahead for that. And I think the in lieu fees, I mean, are they enough? Maybe that's the first thing that I think of, is because it seems like they should be substantial, because the cost to build a space is quite a lot, and especially a covered space. I know of one instance where you can buy a condo and there's no guaranteed space, but you can buy a covered space for, I think, 75 or $100,000 more. So um, that's kind of the world we live in with the downtown area. Just outside of that, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we did amend the ADU requirement for parking space as far as how many or the size of the space. I don't know if that actually happened. We discussed it a lot, but I don't know if it ever actually went through. But there was a lot of discussion about, the ADU had to have a 1.5 spaces or something like that. And I think we reduced it because of the on-street availability. Sandpoint does have tons of on-street parking, especially in the residential area. So I agree. I mean, I've lived here a long time. This debate has been around forever. And the problem is that people don't want to walk to the store, If it's more, you want to park in front of the store. But the reality is those stores are a little bit further out of the core where they have their own parking lots. And I think that's kind of just the frame of mind of the, commercial use, is that's not really available everywhere especially downtown. So I'm more in favor, like if you took the downtown core and there was less parking spaces, people are still gonna go there. And they'll find a place to park, and I think that could potentially hurt some businesses, but some of those businesses they're not like tire shops, and they're not like an every single day, commute for people besides the people that work there. So I'm in favor of looking at making things easier for development, because that's what commercial property is for. It's for retail use. It's business. And that's because of the higher price of the ground and the cost to build. And that's why we have a 0-foot setback on property lines, is because you're trying to maximize your use. And parking does not fit into that, in my opinion.
Thanks. I have one more question for you, and we'll wrap up.
We just
Last-
went downtown for logging trucks.
Oh.
Last one is around the proposal to lift the 4-hour max on 186 parking stalls on the street. This was something I'll admit, like, this was my idea just after talking to downtown business employees and their anxieties about parking tickets. I have not gotten much feedback from anybody on this, and I'm honestly just looking for feedback on this because I understand that there's trade-offs as well. So the idea is to provide all-day free parking for downtown employees away from commercial core. Of course, no one else is going to be prevented from using these 4-hour parking stalls if those time limits are restricted. The goal being to free up scarce parking stalls along First and Cedar, where we have, excess, or I should say over occupancy right now, and then free alternative to downtown business employee parking pass. So some employees might, feel like that $40 a month is too much to get a parking pass for 3-hour, to park in those 3-hour zones and to park in the city parking lot all day. This would provide them with kind of a free alternative. Just walk a little further and you can save $40 a month. The cons are real, though. There would be less turnover and availability of customer parking in front of businesses located in those 4-hour zones. You can see where they are on the map. It's the blue areas. There are some businesses along there. Potential long-term storage of vehicles. Imagine people like, oh, I can leave my boat trailer on the street now. We do not want to see that downtown, right? But if there's no time limits, there's nothing really stopping people from just leaving a vehicle there for days on end. Of course, in the winter, there might still be no overnight parking in these zones. That's something to keep in mind. This would be a summer problem. And then, yeah, I mean, if we're creating more free parking all day, that's going to create less demand for those parking passes that we would like downtown business employees to buy, and downtown residents as well. So less revenue to the city from parking pass sales if we're at the same time making it easier for people to leave their cars on the street all day. So just I'm honestly like, I haven't heard a lot of feedback on this. I think the downtown business employees were like, yay, all day free parking. But I'd like to hear some other perspectives this was very much in response to feedback I got from the downtown business employees, and their bosses, but some feedback from, potential, other stakeholders here would be welcome. And this is the last question I have for you tonight, then we're going to wrap up.
All right. I have a business with 37 employees and they park in the employee area and they have to walk a little ways because I want that prime space for the customers. And I think if I had a business downtown, it'd be the same policy. We want the space in front of the store for the, which kind of goes against what we were talking about just a minute ago, but if employees are filling up the spaces, then I don't know, the no time limit. I don't know how I feel about that. Commissioner.
Thanks. I think it's a bad idea.
Okay.
You would not sell a single pass if you can walk half a block to next door to Bonner General and park for free for the rest of the day. And I mean, yeah. Plus, there's plenty of free options, across Fifth. If you really, can't afford it. I mean, and maybe people can't afford it, but they can park, or they can move their cars every 3-4 hours like they're doing now. Or they can park across Fifth and walk in 2-3 blocks.
Commissioner Benner.
I just got a question. Do you know how many of the employees downtown are actually city residents, or how many of them are coming in from outside the area?
I don't have any of that data, no.
Because I think, excuse me, looking at the Long Bridge and watching all the cars going in and out morning and evening, I think a lot of your people coming in to take those parking spots might not even be city residents here. They may be from outside the area.
Actually, I will, you reminded me of a job study we did in, I think, 2020. I think Mose was on this body at that time. There was some data in that job study about number of jobs in Sandpoint and then number of, the size of Sandpoint's labor force, and it's something like a 2-to-1 ratio. So approximately half of the labor force in Sandpoint commutes from outside of Sandpoint. It was something like, I forget the exact numbers, but if it was, 3,000 jobs in Sandpoint, or no, 3,000 adult, working age people in the labor force in Sandpoint, we have something like 7,000 jobs in Sandpoint. So just a simple calculation shows you that a large percentage of our labor force commutes from outside of Sandpoint.
Yeah, and the reason I was bringing that up is that it makes it a little more difficult for people like that to ride their bike or use other means of transportation to come to work.
I have one really interesting anecdote, actually. I'm not going to name any names, but a downtown business owner who I met with yesterday told me that they told all their employees that the city lot was going to be closed for the next 3 weeks and that they should find other ways to get to work. And starting yesterday, most of his employees found ways to get to work either by scooter, bicycle, carpooling, or public transport. And as a result, didn't create a lot of extra demand for street parking. And it really got us thinking, like,
Yeah.
Isn't that what we should be doing through policies, creating incentives for people to take alternative modes of transport
Exactly,
to work anyway?
Well, we had that discussion in our coffee gathering this morning too.
Yeah, good. Okay, so I got a clear answer from Commissioner Mitchell. Does anybody else have a clear opinion on this? Because I'd like just, give me a thumbs up or down. We don't need a motion or anything, but thumbs down on this. I see.
I think this is just gonna chase people further out into the residential areas as things grow downtown.
Which they can do now.
I think especially close to some of these businesses like Evans Brothers or McDuff's up there, I think keeping those hourly limits near those businesses is important. And I mean, maybe you could massage this a little bit where a couple of those segments are no time limit, but I think generally majority of it should stay hourly.
Okay. Thank you. Good feedback. All right, we're gonna wrap it up here. So again, just revisiting why are we working on a parking management plan? These are the stated purposes in the first two paragraphs of the plan itself. We're trying to solve the inefficient utilization problem to bring both our street and off-street and on-street parking closer to their effective capacities of 85%. And we're trying to solve a funding problem. We are currently spending $435,000 of property taxes to resurface a parking lot downtown. My hope is that the next time we have to resurface a downtown parking lot, there's funds available to do it from the users of those parking facilities. And if we do implement an ordinance that brings parking requirements back to downtown for certain types of developments, such as residential, and provide the opportunity to pay in lieu fees, we could see a generation of in lieu fees grow to hopefully expand public parking in the future if that time comes where it's necessary. And then one final slide, just a time frame for next steps towards implementation of a parking management plan. Tonight is April 15th. You can kind of see what we're trying to get towards in the next couple of months towards a parking management plan going to City Council on the 21st of May. That may or may not include an ordinance that this body would have heard the night before with a proposed amendment to Title IX, Chapter 5 off-street. Actually, we're going to bring an ordinance in one way or another because there's a lot of things in that ordinance, not even related necessarily to parking requirements and in lieu fees that we need to fix up. That's some code that needs some cleaning up one way or another. So we're planning to bring that to you on May 20th. Yeah, so that's the time frame, and that's the end of my presentation.
I got a clarifying question. Sorry, I'm just maybe a little late today, but so you're potentially proposing that developers would just pay in lieu fees, but still not have to require any parking stalls downtown?
That would be the option. And if you look at the actual language in the parking management plan, or if you dive into the ordinance itself, there's a little bit more to it, right? Parking requirements would be determined by square footage, not number of bedrooms, or not number of units. And up to 50% of the required parking could be paid or reduced through in lieu payments administratively. If a developer wanted to eliminate more than 50% of their parking requirement, it would require approval from the Planning Commission. So there could be a request brought to the Planning Commission. For example, if you have a downtown residential development, the per square footage requirement is 20 units or 20 parking stalls. You come in and you say, look, my project doesn't pencil out with 20, but I'm willing to provide 10 and I'd like to pay in lieu for an additional 10, or I just don't have the space for 20 parking stalls. Staff can approve that reduction of half and the payment of in lieu fees, but anything beyond that half would have to come to the Planning Commission for approval.
Would you remove the boundary that we currently have then that has no parking requirements?
The proposal does not involve changing the boundary of the current in lieu fee, but it could, if this body wanted to change that. That's actually described in the Title IX, Chapter 5 ordinance itself. So when we bring you a version of that for consideration, you could propose expanding or reducing that boundary.
Yeah, because now it could, sorry,
Go ahead.
it's like we gotta work on the, parliamentary procedure stuff. Yeah, because then now there's zones that aren't captured by that are, more commercial, that could be commercial residential, like I was saying, like on the north side of Fifth or up Church Street where like the granary is, that building across from the granary, Superior across from the McFarland House, next to the McFarland House, like all the way to the marina. There just seems to be some gaps in that zone,
Yeah, I think when that comes back for discussion, it's absolutely, all of it's on the table when we have a hearing in terms of the boundaries, what any particular portion of the ordinance says. Just for food for thought, some cities are abolishing parking requirements altogether, throughout the entire city. So it's this is very much, a topical issue in city planning circles right now. So you'll have your ability to take a look at that map when we bring it back.
Any more discussion?
I just had a question that came up. In comparison with impact fees that have to be spent normally within 8, but maybe 11 years if there's some kind of extenuating circumstance, is the proposal for the in lieu parking fee that would put it into account presumably to build some kind of structure someday, would that have a time, is that subject to a time frame as well?
That'd be a question for our finance director.
Okay.
The language in the ordinance right now for the parking in lieu fund doesn't describe a time limit. It just describes what specifically in lieu parking fees can be used for. And that language is actually in your parking in your staff materials tonight.
Page 114.
Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna call that good. Thank you, Jason. Thanks,
You
Bill.
guys.
No new business on the agenda. We'll move on to our final items. Are there general matters that staff would like to bring to the attention of the commission at this time?
I don't think so. No.
That's good. Thank you. Commissioners, do you have any roundtable topics for discussion? Anything on your mind you want to get off your chest right now? We have
In the deer.
The only thing I'd like to say is I'm ready to end the meeting. And with no further business, we'll do that. Meeting adjourned at 7:57.